can I ask you a question? What does it mean to live well in a world dominated and celebrated by convenience and processed foods? Well, in this episode, we explore the rising tension of America's wellness, awareness, and its continuous reliance on ultra-processed diets. More than 82% of today's modern American consumer says they prioritize wellness. However, more than 60% of the average American calorie intake still comes from ultra-processed foods. Highlighting this disconnect is my friends over at McKinsey Company. By the same token and at the same time, the U.S. wellness market has surged to over $480 billion, growing at 5 to 10% annually, which is fueled largely by millennials and Gen Z alike. Enter my friends at UpWellness. It's a company built around the concept of nutrient-rich living. It was born out of a naturopathic doctor's office. UpWellness was created to bridge the gap between the demand for natural health care and the limited access to it after 15 years of clinical practice, long waitlists, and a desire to help more people. The co-founder of UpWellness, Dr. Joshua Levitt, set out to scale the principles of naturopathic medicine beyond the walls of his practice. Dr. Josh is a naturopathic physician, educator, and a former clinical preceptor at the Yale School of Medicine, who brings over 2 decades of experience to this very conversation. He's here today to share how UpWellness combines science-backed and high-quality herbal and nutritional supplements with a mission for others to empower themselves and take control of their health. This conversation unpacks the realities of modern wellness, the rise of preventative health, and how companies like UpWellness are redefining the conversation on what it means to get well and stay well. And Dr. Levitt joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. If you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, my friend, and I'm super excited to learn how you help people through the power of medicine, my friend. It's great to see you, and happy Wednesday to you.
Yeah, to you too. It's good to be here. This is, I think, going to be an interesting interview for us both, and I hope I can help you understand my perspective a little bit and that of your listeners as well.
Yeah, and just before we dive into the nitty-gritty of our conversation, Doctor, I wanted to ask you about your love of surfing, my friend, because I know you're an avid surfer. You're originally from San Diego, but I know that surfing is a big part of your life, my friend. So why is that a passion and purpose for you, my friend?
That's my favorite question. I could go on and on. We might get sidetracked here. Surfing, like you said, I grew up in San Diego, so became a hobby early on, but it quickly became more than a hobby and sort of a sport, right? That's got all the physical activity components that I like, and all the good times, the fun and surfing language, we call it being stoked. But really, I think what that's about is the connection to nature, right? Like what you're doing when you're surfing is you're riding a wave, an ocean wave that is the product of a storm at a great distance, thousands of miles away, that manifests itself, that like, marches across vast oceans and then ends its journey on the beach. And that wave that we ride is the very sort of culmination of that journey, and kind of just being connected to that and like riding a wave. And you don't get to decide what to do, right? It's the wave that determines what the line is, the direction, where you're going to go, how fast or slow you're going to go. All of those elements, especially when it's packaged up in that fun and exhilarating way, is just, it's an addiction in the best possible way.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you think your love of surfing has made you a better physician, my friend? How has it calmed emotions or regulated yourself to be a better physician? I'm curious to get your answer there, my friend.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never been really asked that before too, so I love that. There's a couple parts of it that I would say. Number one is that connection to nature, right? So I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom in nature, in our bodies, in our environment, right, in the natural world, and that's and I make use of a lot of that wisdom in the form of nutrients and food and herbal medicines and whatnot. So surfing I can't think of a better way to connect to nature, at least for me. A lot of people will find such a similar connection in hiking or being out in the woods or in nature of any sort. But that's one way that I connect. So that's that nature connection is one part of it. And then the other part, I alluded to this earlier, is that fluidity, right? The ability to pivot when you need to pivot, the ability to take the guidance from what you're seeing in front of you, right? A surfer doesn't get to decide what they're going to do on a particular ride, on a particular wave. It's the wave that gets to decide that. And then the surfer needs to be nimble and agile and have that ability to kind of go with the flow. That's another one. And then the last one, and I'll leave you with this. A lot of people would maybe say that a surfer or accuse a surfer of being good at balance, right? We have good balance because we're able to ride that board. But the reality is there's no such thing as balance in this sport. It's really good management of imbalance is really what you're seeing. When someone has good balance, it's dynamic, it's flowing, it's fast. And so no one's balance in that sense is not like a static thing. It's a dynamic thing. And it's actually more true to call it active management of imbalance. And that's also helpful as a doctor too.
Yeah, absolutely. No. Dr. Levitt, I know that you've spent over 20 years as a naturopathic physician helping thousands of patients through a root cause approach to healing, my friend. So I'm curious to ask you, what led you down this path? And what keeps you passionate and motivated to do this work up until today, my friend? Tell me more about your medical story and why you decided to go down this particular route, my friend.
Sure. So I was one of those kids that just always wanted to be a doctor. Maybe that sounds weird to some people and totally not weird to others, right? Like that was just always a thing. Lots of doctors in my family. It just was always an attraction. And that led me to UCLA, where I did my undergraduate work. And my dad was working in a family practice residency at UCLA at the time, and I had a lot of VIP access, you might say, to doctors in the system. And they were actually, believe it or not, discouraging. This is now close to 30 years ago, about careers in medicine. They were like, it ain't what it used to be, basically. And I kind of heeded that advice. And I took a year off after UCLA to travel around the world and try to just sort of sort out where I was headed next. And during a long story short, during that trip, I was sleeping in youth hostels and hitchhiking around and whatnot. Didn't have the best personal hygiene at the time. I admit that. I got an infection on my foot, ascended up my leg. It was cellulitis, and I needed an antibiotic. So I was in Switzerland at the time. I got a prescription for an antibiotic called in, and I went into this Swiss pharmacy to pick up this antibiotic, which I desperately needed because I was in serious shape there with a fever and a very bad infection. And in that Swiss pharmacy, unlike any pharmacy I had ever seen, there were herbal medicines and teas and nutritional medicines and vitamins and minerals and homeopathic stuff, all this natural medicine stuff that was totally new to me. And that lit a fire that has just never gone out. That's been my entire career. That spark that I saw there. The antibiotics cured me, by the way, and it led me down this path that is kind of continues to be my career. And it's really ironic in a way because I'm a natural medicine doctor who found my passion when I needed conventional medicine, when I needed an antibiotic that day. That's the story.
Well, there's something unique about irony finding yourself, isn't it?
There sure is. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Dr. Rob, I'm curious to ask you about anything you want the general public to know about naturopathic medicine that may be misconstrued, or anything you want to clear up about the power of naturopathic medicine, and what you want the public to know, my friend.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions out there. One of the most common questions that I get as a naturopathic doctor is, are you a homeopathic doctor? And the answer to that is no. Homeopathic medicine is this very distinct field that I actually don't work with at all. There are naturopathic doctors who do. So that's one misconception. And then the other, and I think this one's really core to the way that I think about health and medicine, both naturopathic and conventional, and that is this. For many people, when they have a health problem of any sort, the conventional option, right, the regular Western medical doctor, often feels overly powerful. Drugs, surgery, hospitals, that's what people's vision of medicine is. And for a lot of problems, especially acute ones, that's a great system. I throw no shade on conventional medicine. It's fantastic. But for the chronic, more burdensome problems that a lot of people suffer with, those guns feel too big, if you will. Mm-hmm. And then on the flip side, you have this perception out there about natural medicine that it's like this spiritual thing, that it's weird, that it's Eastern, that it's woo-woo or out there in some kind of way. And what I would like people to know, or any misconception I'd like to clear up, is that that's not what naturopathic medicine is. Sure, on either side of that spectrum, from conventional to alternative, there are people that are at the ends, right, at the outliers. But core to naturopathic medicine is really just good medicine, looking at root causes of illness, using a hierarchical approach to try to get a person better, right? And that might start with food or movement or nutrition or herbal medicine and then work its way up. And so I think that the big misconception, to kind of nail it down, is that it's not as alternative as you might think.
Yeah, and I also know, as the co-founder of UpWellness, my friend, you've trained future physicians as a clinical preceptor at Yale Medicine, and as I mentioned, the co-founder of UpWellness, to reach millions globally, my friend. What was the turning point that made you realize you needed to expand beyond clinical practice, my friend? Tell me about UpWellness and your connection to it, my friend.
Sure. Yeah. So, my career started in much the way any clinician's career would start, right? I was in clinical practice. I built, own, and run, and still to this day, a healthy and successful clinical practice. But there's a math problem in clinical medicine. In my model, with the longer appointments, I can only realistically see maybe 15 people a day. That's kind of the ceiling. And I just realized that the information, the advice, the products, the guidance that I was giving to people was really helping them and changing their lives. Not just like managing their conditions, but actually changing the trajectory of their health. And I understood many years ago, 15 years ago now, that there were millions of people sitting at home with similar kinds of problems, similar questions, and just no access to a naturopathic doctor like me. So UpWellness was built on that really simple idea. It was a bridge that I'm trying to build between the clinic and the advice that I can give there, and knowing that bridge just needed to be a lot wider, right? Giving that kind of good health information and products. I didn't think that they should be sort of gatekept behind a personalized doctor's appointment. Now, of course, there's challenges in providing medical guidance or information to cast a wider net like that, because it's less individualized, which is a core principle of naturopathic medicine. But there's a whole lot there that can reach a lot more people, and that allows me to have a lot more impact with this field that I'm just so passionate about. That's what it's about.
Yeah, and Doctor, I'm curious to ask you about the current state of the healthcare system more broadly? Because I know that you are known for simplifying, complex health concepts. And what do you think people need to know about the healthcare system to make it less confusing, my friend? So if I asked you to, sort of categorize how you think about current healthcare and how it can be improved, what do you think people need to know, my friend?
It's a great question. And I want to be honest, but not too cynical here. I think part of the problem that we have is that there's money in the complexity, right? And that's sort of sad state of affairs. I know you're in Canada. Here in America, our healthcare system is exceedingly complex and expensive. And like I said, there's a lot of money in that complexity. But when we take it down to brass tacks, if you will, right? Like we're talking about health. I think that it's fair, and most of us could agree that our bodies are built to work, right? They're built to heal as well. Anybody who's ever experienced a cut on their skin and watched it heal, like it's a system that works, right? And it's a system that can get thrown off course in any number of different ways. And when we look to the reasons why something, whether it's a skin wound or something else, isn't healing, often the answer to that, the obstacle to that healing, is something rather simple. It's nutrition, it's food, it's movement, it's sleep, it's stress, all these kinds of things. And so many of the chronic illnesses that are just adding to the weight of complexity in the healthcare system right now are just they're downstream of those fundamentals being kind of out of order. So I think it's boring advice, but it's start with the basics and then refine from there. And it's amazing how much movement of the needle, so to speak, you can get when you start with those basics.
Yeah, and doctor, this is a bit of a personal question for me, doctor, because I was born with cerebral palsy. So if I don't listen to my body, my muscles contract faster than most people. But from your perspective, I'm curious to ask you about the importance of listening to your body and why you believe that a movement is medicine, because our bodies are made to move. So what are your best pieces of advice when it comes to the importance of listening to your body? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, that's a good. I appreciate the personal nature and the vulnerability there, Kevin. It's true, and you probably understand this maybe more than most people because of your condition. And I think the answer lies in that your body talks to you, right? And some louder than others, and it talks in the form of symptoms, right? Like, so those symptoms might be, it depends on who you are and what you're dealing with, but fatigue or bloating or brain fog or muscle or dizziness, muscle problems, sleep, whatever it is, right? Like those things aren't just like nuisances or problems that need to be suppressed or silenced or pushed through. They're messages, right? They're like communication between your body and your brain. And that's to some extent, that's what that mind body connection is. And so listening to your body means like just getting curious and trying to understand that language instead of being frustrated. And then trying to make like the shift from suppression of symptoms, right, into support of body systems. There's an example of this, and obviously there's some nuance here, but like one example is a fever, which comes up a lot in natural medicine discussions about these core issues. Is a fever is a body's natural response to an infection, and it's a desirable response. The fever raises your own body temperature to make your body inhospitable to whatever critter, virus, bacteria, or whatever you've become infected with. That's a good thing, right? Like it might make you uncomfortable for a period of time because fevers feel bad, but they also feel bad for that bug that is the infection that you have. And that's a good thing. So when we just simply suppress the fever because we don't like the way it feels, we then allow for that infection to take hold maybe a little stronger or last a little longer, and so a fever is just one example. And yes, there are times, before anybody kind of drags me through the comments here, there are times where a fever ought to be suppressed. Definitely. It can be problematic if it goes up really high or if it goes up really fast. There are times where fevers need to be suppressed. But at its core, a fever is a healthy immunologic response, and suppressing it can be problematic. And that example can be just played out over and over in every different body system you can think of.
Yeah, absolutely. And doctor, as you've mentioned, you've seen both conventional and natural medicine up close. So I'm curious when we talk about general healthcare in general, where do you think it falls short, and how do you think people can rethink their approach to healing, my friend, and really get back to what works for them individually, my friend? So, how do you think we can rethink our approach to healing, in your opinion?
Well, I think inside this question, I'll answer it sort of both ways. You asked where medicine falls short, and like, you've got conventional medicine, right? Our dominant system, and then you've got natural medicine. And quite honestly, both have their strengths, but both very definitely have their weaknesses too, and both can fall short. And really, like, I think what that comes down to on both sides, honestly, is dogma, right? Like the idea that my way is the best way because it's my way, right? Like that's I think one kind of way that you could think about dogma. And we certainly have that in conventional medicine, right? Like many sort of practitioners within the Western conventional medicine space just poo-poo everything that's natural because they didn't learn it in their medical training. And then on the flip side, on the alternative medicine side, you have many people who dismiss anything conventional, no matter what it is, whatever other intervention, just because it's conventional. So I think like the biggest problem that we have is that dogma. That's a core issue. And if we could just be more open-minded, it would go a long way to fixing the problems on both sides.
Yeah, I also, doctor, wanted to ask you about the emotional side of medicine, whether it be traditional or naturopathic. And I wanted to frame it by asking you about, the emotional toll that the healing journey takes. And, often patients can feel, dismissed, or that their emotional healing journey, along with their physical healing journey, isn't always sort of commingled. So, how do you think we can also find the path forward when it comes to emotional or empathetic healing? What are your thoughts there?
Another great question, man. Let me think about this. So I would answer it this way. I think it's fair, and it's hard to disagree that we are more than just a physical body, right? And so when a person comes in, no matter what the problem is, right? Whether the problem is their knee hurts, or they have wax in their ear, or they have a serious chronic or terminal disease, they're a body, right? They have a mind, they've got a spirit, right? I've never just seen a disembodied kidney or a liver come walking into my office. It's always been inside of a person, and that person exists inside of an environment, right? Often a family, sometimes functional, sometimes not, a household, a career path, an environment in which they live, a nutritional environment in which they live. So and their emotions are all wrapped up in that. So to that question, it's very important for any physician or healthcare practitioner, for that matter, to make sure that there is attention being paid to the emotions of a person. For so many people, they just get dismissed, and it's so frustrating for patients to have a problem that is real to them, whatever that problem is, and then be dismissed because the laboratory work or the CT scan or the MRI doesn't show anything, and they say everything's fine. And then the patient's like, well, everything's not fine. That's why I'm here, right? And that it's very easy for that person to feel that the emotional aspects are being dismissed, or they're being told that their problem is purely emotional, and that's really not fair. The way I try to find solutions to this is like, we don't need dramatic breakthroughs, right? Like I try to find small levers to pull, right? Like, and often they're food or movement or just a little shift to your daily routine that can make a difference. Because I find that if I give somebody just a small win, right, on whatever parameter it is that we're trying to move on, that can really make a big difference, gain and earn their trust, not just in me as a physician, but in themselves as as an entity, a sentient being that can heal, and then the progress starts being made. So that's my take on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doctor, I also wanted to talk to you about the importance of habits because you emphasize that the most effective health changes are often the simplest to make, but the hardest to stick to, my friend. So let's talk about habits and how can people create that consistency. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Yeah, you're right, and I think it's kind of like unsexy, maybe even a little bit boring. And the thing is that simple doesn't mean easy, right? And that's something that doesn't get maybe discussed enough. Going to bed at the same time every night, it sounds like a trivial thing until you're like awake at 11 p.m. just doom scrolling on your phone or something. And yes, it's consistency in those daily habits, your routines, your stress, your nutrition, how you conduct yourself on the daily. And I've found, and I found this just as a pattern that I can predict at this point, that the people who are going to have success in modifying their health in a meaningful way are the ones who are able to get and stay motivated with small daily habitual changes. That's the ones who like making healthy choices the path of least resistance. Like, I'm going to exercise daily, I'm going to eat this, I'm going to not eat or drink that, and then stick with it, and then stick with it again tomorrow, and then stick with it again the next day. That is how you get the wins.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Levitt, I also wanted to talk to you about, trust and having trust in the healthcare system because you and I both know that there are conflicting advice for anything when it comes to trust. So,
Yeah.
what do you think it will take for people to regain or reimagine trust in the healthcare system? What's your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, first of all, you're so right, and a lot of people are now, and I think I'm seeing articles in the mainstream medical literature right now about exactly this eroding trust in the healthcare system, and people are now looking to certainly social media, Instagram, and elsewhere, TikTok for the latest health trends. Like, this is where they're getting their information from. Obviously, a lot of people are now leaning on AI for health information, which might be a good thing, right? It's not always accurate, as I'm sure you know. But you're absolutely right that there is eroding trust in the healthcare system, and there's been maybe some bad PR over the last bunch of years, and maybe some poor decision making at the highest levels that have led to that. How do we fix it, right? Well, I think I'm a fan of AI. I'm a fan of Instagram. I'm there myself. I do think you have to be careful about who you choose to listen to, right? Who you choose to follow or trust. And then what you really want to do is you want to start with something that's really verifiable, right? Like, you shouldn't try to overhaul your entire health or cure your disease based on an Instagram philosophy or a TikTok post. Do something simple. Start with those boring basics again, right? Drink some water with electrolytes in the morning. Do it for 2 weeks every day and just see what happens. Try sleeping for 7 or maybe even 8 hours every single night and just track what changes. And if you start to generate your own data, right? Like, take back that control rather than relinquishing the control to somebody else, for your health. That's when you start to see this kind of root cause approach kind of like start to pay off. So that's how you rebuild the trust. You rebuild it in the same way that it got slow, repeated experiences.
Yeah, and Doctor, just because I'm curious to get your answer, you alluded to earlier that the cost or the expensive cost of healthcare, and a lot of Americans have lost their health care based on the political winds of the moment in America. And I'm not asking you to get political, but I am asking you to tell me, how do you think we can get healthcare costs under control? And what do you think needs to be done to have an honest and transparent discussion about the cost of healthcare, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not going to get political. I have no business doing it. It's not my area, nor is like a large scale kind of public health policy. But I think the simplest answer to the question, and the one that would move the needle the most, is we need to be healthier, right? Like if we were healthier, this is the problem, right? Part of the reason for the exorbitant costs of healthcare in America and the world is our tragic state of unhealth, right? Like of disease, right? We have
Mhm.
like a massive problem in terms, and that problem has its roots in our diet and in our lifestyles, right? Like we eat too much of the wrong things. We don't eat enough of the right things. We don't move our bodies near enough. We are exposed to, massive amounts of all sorts of different things that aren't good for us. Some by our own choices, some by choices that are that are outside of our control. And so, if we can treat those core problems, which is fundamentally the food is the biggest one, that's going to be the biggest lever, we will become healthier, and a healthier population needs less healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'm looking ahead to your field. I'm curious to ask you about what do you predict as the future of naturopathic medicine and in digestive health, or your everyday sort of bailiwick? What do you think is the future of your industry, my friend?
Well, it's interesting to think about it from my perspective. Like I got into this in the mid 1990s. I've been at it for a long time, so I've seen it grow immensely. What was a fringe field back in the day has now become mainstream, and I think that trend is continuing. What I can see from my vantage point is continued interest and massive growth in all of these areas, right? Whether it's the food and nutrition, kind of people are putting their attention there, in nutritional and dietary supplements, which is an area very close to my heart of my business, and we're seeing just staggering growth in that field and have year over year over year over year. So I think that like over the next decade or so, if we can put that kind of a timeline on it, there's a reckoning happening, right? The chronic disease epidemic, the rates of these kind of problems are not improving. The costs are absolutely unsustainable, and people are just losing faith in that system. So I think that we are already seeing a shift towards more personalized healthcare. I think more preventative care, and it's not going to be a luxury, but really kind of as a necessity. I bristle a little bit because I think the very high costs of a lot of this personalized VIP type of healthcare are also unsustainable, especially for the people who may need it the most. So I do think that like as if I can have anything to do with it, it's like continuing to build that bridge between the naturopathic world and the conventional world, shoring it up, making that bridge more sturdy and even wider, giving more access to these kind of preventative natural medicine, close to the earth type of tools, is something that is just going to continue to reinforce over the next decade.
Yeah, one question, that everyday people or ordinary people, sometimes struggle with, doctor, is how can they distinguish between what are symptoms and what their body is experiencing as an illness, my friend. So tell me about, your body signaling to yourself, and how we distinguish between, symptoms and an actual illness. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to the question we were talking about earlier, which is about that kind of two-way communication. That symptoms are messengers, right? Like if your knee hurts, then that's telling you that there's something wrong there, and that would indeed be a symptom that one would want to pay attention to and start to try to understand where it's coming from, and then address whatever that is. I mentioned fever before. Another one that comes up all the time is inflammation, right? Inflammation, everyone sees it as this terrible thing, but it's absolutely life-giving, right? It's necessary. It's the way that we respond to not just infections, but any kind of trauma, right? Our bodies respond with inflammation, but and inflammation is such an interesting one because it's named after fire. I don't know if you ever heard inflammo, right? The Latin for fire, and
Mm-hmm.
inflammation is much like fire, right? It's red and it's hot. And there's actually Latin kind of rubric, mnemonic to understand what is inflammation, which is about redness, about heat, about swelling, and about pain. Rubor, tumor, calor, and dolor. That's the Latin for what defines inflammation. And what in much the same way as a fire, and this is the metaphor I think I can give to you and to your listeners on this question, is that like a campfire or a candlelit dinner is fire, like in a good way, right? Like we like it. It's probably a big part of like how evolved we are as a species is our ability to kind of maintain and control fire. But as you know from Canada and as me from California too, fire can also be a very destructive force, right? And so that's when it's excessive and it's out of control. And so the difference between that kind of question of symptoms of illness versus the body's attempt to heal is that those symptoms are like for the first messenger. And what we need to do is kind of pay attention to them and understand whether or not they are contained and controlled and balanced and reasonable or completely out of control. I don't know. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I also quickly wanted to ask you about healthcare accountability as it comes to nutrition because, I don't think a lot of people realize what they put into their body is kind of like an engine, we need fuel to go about our days, but we also need to be cognizant of what we're storing as actual nutrition and fat and all the rest of it. So talk to me about healthcare accountability from a nutritional standpoint, doctor, and why it's so important to monitor what we put into our bodies. What's your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, I mean, yes, it's like I said, it's probably the biggest lever we can pull from a public health perspective, and it's also for many people the biggest lever they can pull in their own personal or individual health is that of food. And I think that like food, it didn't used to be, and it shouldn't need to be this complex. We now have experts, dietary and nutrition experts, and countless books and videos and podcasts and programs teaching people what to eat. But if you think about like maybe animals in the wild or something, right? Like they don't really need any coaches, like dolphins, who are kind of similar to us in terms of their intelligence, don't need like a nutritionist to ask them if they should eat this fish and not that one, right? The problem is we've gotten so ahead of ourselves that our food processing, which has enabled us to make this massive surplus of calories and fat and sugar, which are things that we have such strong cravings for, just, so readily accessible to us that we've just kind of lost control over our own evolutionary cravings. And the accountability, I think, yes, there needs to be, and I'm again, not going to be political here, but there needs to be some policy level, like, government level policy changes with respect to food and nutrition and what we allow our populations to eat. And then the accountability has to be personal. People have to, again, find a trusted advisor, cut through the noise, get back closer to earth. Think about the foods that your grandmother or great grandmother or grandfather thought of as foods. And if they wouldn't recognize it as foods, then you probably shouldn't eat it, right? And if you keep that simple thing in mind, foods that are close to the earth or as close to the earth as possible, I call that minimally processed. It's hard to go wrong with a minimally processed diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And doctor, I've got two questions left
Yeah.
for you. And the first of those two questions is this, my friend. I'm not a huge believer in comparing yourself because, it's my belief that the only expectations in life are that you have to live up to are your own, doctor. So in that sense, I'm curious to ask you about if someone's just starting their healing journey, about realistic timelines and the importance of not comparing yourself to other people's healing journey, because that I think can get dicey a little bit, and I wonder if you agree with that sentiment, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I agree with that. It can be dicey. You certainly don't want to compare yourself to somebody else, although many marketers would like you to do that, results not as advertised or something, right? I think, and this is not an answer that's going to please anybody, but the answer is it depends. It totally depends on the person, and it depends on the problem that they have. But that said, I think that if we look at if we look at the timelines that we use to measure various things like liver enzymes, for example, or various markers inside someone's blood work, or look at the very recycling of blood that happens through our spleen and our liver and our bone marrow and that sort of cycle, what we tend to see is that there's a rather full circle, kind of a full replacement of that blood and therefore the parameters associated with it on a 90-day timeline. So that, if we're going to check someone who has diabetes, check the hemoglobin A1C, we check it every 3 months. Your liver function tests were abnormal. We're going to make some changes and then check it again in 3 months. Like, you'll hear that 3-month thing come up a lot. So I often sort of, if we're just speaking very generally here, with a new person who's new to this natural medicine thing, and maybe is going to start making some dietary changes and cut out this and add in some of that, maybe start taking some nutrients or herbal medicines, then I would probably say, like, let's revisit the various things that you presented here with in a 3-month timeline. Maybe I'll see you in 6 weeks, and then we'll really look to see how you're doing in 12.
Yeah, absolutely. And Doctor, I'm curious to end on this 2-part question because, I'm a big believer in self-reflection and sort of taking stock of where I've been and where I'm going and where I want to go. So when you look at your own individual, personal, and professional legacy, my friend, how do you think you want your legacy to be defined, my friend?
That's a good one. I believe in that too. I think it's really great a couple times a year to take inventory, take stock. Where are we? Where do we want to be? Where have we been? Celebrate the wins. My legacy, gosh, it feels no problem, but it makes me feel old to start thinking about legacy already. I still got a few more years yet to develop it. I think really it's actually pretty simple, right? Like, I hope that someone somewhere made a decision or took a piece of my advice or a product that I developed, and that decision helped them feel better in some way or another. Really, that's honestly what it is. It was like I stumbled into this pharmacy with an infection so many years ago, and then that spark got lit, and that fire still burns, and now I'm able to provide like this information, this content, written material, video material, like this podcast interview itself, products that I've created for UpWellness that can make meaningful changes in people's lives. And if I've done my job, that's happened to at least one person and hopefully more. And that's what I would consider a career well spent.
Yeah, and just before I ask you how people can connected with you and UpWellness, I'm also curious, based on what you just said, to ask you about the importance of people doing their own research in terms of naturopathic solutions to healing, because, marketing has gotten very clever, and I'm curious about your advice to people who want to be their own best self-advocate and really cut through the marketing fluff and actually get through tangible solutions. So what's your thoughts on how to be your best sort of naturopathic, best self-advocate? What are your thoughts there?
My cheeky answer, which is sort of true, is that they should just follow me on Instagram.
Sure.
That's like kind of a dual answer to your question, right? Hey, I'm your trusted source. So, it's the @@ symbol and then Dr. Josh Levitt, Dr. Josh Levitt. But you're right? Like, so people, there needs to be, people need to take back some of that control. And yes, do their own homework, find trusted advisors, naturopathic doctors, especially board certified naturopathic doctors that are members of the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. The AANP is a really good place to start. I would urge a lot of caution. Yeah. And because you're right, that marketing and medicine are two different things. And of course, if you have good medicine, it's also important to market that medicine so people know about it. You're right. Marketing is clever. There's a cluttered marketplace and you got to cut through the noise somehow. But people do need to be careful of that shiny object syndrome, that silver bullet type of promise, and find trusted advisors and stick with them. It's ideal. And this is, I think, maybe a good piece of advice. If you're looking at a company especially a company that produces products, because I know nutritional supplement products like the ones that we make at UpWellness are very attractive to a lot of people. To make sure that there's a person on that team who has real clinical experience. I am the medical director and the co-founder of UpWellness. And I say this not as a pitch, but just as an interesting observation that it shouldn't seem so unusual that a person with my background, 20 years of clinical experience, would kind of start a nutritional supplement company. But it turns out that having a real doctor, like me, who has real clinical experience at the helm of a nutritional supplement company is exceedingly rare, right? Most of the companies that are out there, there's no doctors, there's no medical people at all, right? They're purely marketing companies that are jumping on an industry. They're probably marketing people who are like, I wonder what I want to sell. We could do, I don't know, want to do supplements? Supplements is a big industry. It's rapidly growing. Yeah, let's do that. And then they make products. It's like, what the heck? So if you're looking at companies like that, and it certainly doesn't need to be UpWellness, although I'm a big fan of the products we make sure that there's somebody there who has clinical chops, please.
Well, because we only have one life to live, right? So
yeah.
Hey, Doctor, before I let you go, if people want to get connected to UpWellness or yourself personally, what's the best way they can do that?
There's a few ways. UpWellness is a good sized company. We have a nice website. I'm happy to have you go check it out. UpWellness.com. UpWellness is a surfing term, by the way. The upwelling is a nutrient-rich infusion in the ocean that's related to currents. That's why UpWellness is called UpWellness. So you can find me at UpWellness.com. And then also I'm on all the social media platforms as well. Instagram, TikTok, at DRJOSH Levitt. And you'll find me there. I'd love to get to know you.
Well, Dr. Josh, I want to thank you for engaging in this conversation about naturopathic medicine and for engaging in conversation with me, my friend. I think you're doing great work to make us live in a healthier and healing nation, my friend. And I want to thank you for your time this afternoon and for being here, my friend. It's most appreciated.
Yeah. Thank you for yours too, Kevin. This was great. You have really great questions. I've done a lot of these kind of interviews, and I think there's a lot of insight and time and thought put into the way that you ask the questions too. So I appreciate that a lot.